Welcome back to Crime Time, Inc.
Today, we're going to be looking at the case of Paul Stephen Haigh.
Okay.
He is an Australian serial killer, and it's a tough case dealing with some truly horrific acts.
I can imagine. Yeah, you gave me a lot to go through for this one.
Yeah.
Court transcripts, articles about Hay's various appeals, even some video footage.
Yeah.
This case has it all.
It does. And, I think it's important to remember that our goal here isn't to sensationalize the violence.
Right.
But to try and understand it.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the facts of Hay's actions and the legal system's response to his crimes.
So where do we even begin with this one? I see that he's currently serving 6 life sentences without parole for the murders of 7 people.
Yeah.
One of whom was a 9-year-old child.
Yes, that's right. And what makes this case even more disturbing is we have access to Hay's own words about his crimes.
Wow.
Both from his trial and his written accounts.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah.
The YouTube video, Australian serial killer Paul Stephen Haigh, includes clips from his trial and some of his written descriptions. For example, he describes in detail how he stabbed Lisa Brearley 157 times.
Yes. And he also admits to having sex with her after death.
Oh my goodness.
It's truly horrific. His description of the murder of 10-year-old Danny Mitchell is equally disturbing.
What happened there?
Haigh killed Danny to prevent him from being a witness to his mother's murder.
Wow.
He wrote that, while he knew killing a child was wrong, he felt it was justified because he believed the boy's mother, Mrs. Gardner, was a bad mother for putting her son in that position.
Geez, trying to justify the murder of a child really gives you some insight into his mental state.
Right.
It's almost as if he needs to convince himself that he's not a monster.
That's a good point. This need to justify his actions seems to point to a lack of empathy, which is also noted by psychiatrist Dr. Yvonne Skinner during Hay's trial.
Okay.
She testified that he had a moderate to high risk of reoffending.
That's interesting. I also came across an article about Haigh winning a court battle to have 4 tarot cards returned to him in prison. The cards featured bare-breasted women and were considered pornographic by the prison.
Yeah, this detail is significant because Haigh identifies as a practicing pagan.
Oh.
Which essentially means he follows a spiritual path that draws from pre-Christian traditions and emphasizes a connection to nature.
Oh.
He argued that these cards were necessary for his religious practice.
Wow, it makes you wonder, can someone capable of such horrific acts truly find religion and reform?
Right.
Or is this all just an act?
That's a question a lot of people ask when it comes to the possibility of rehabilitation for individuals who commit heinous crimes. It's a complex issue.
Absolutely. Another thing that struck me while going through these materials was the emotional impact of Hay's crimes on the victims' families.
Yeah.
There's a YouTube video, Cold-Blooded, Not Human,
Right.
which features interviews with family members.
Uh-huh.
It's really hard to watch.
I understand one family member describes how they're re-traumatized every time Hay's name appears in the media. They say, "I wish he would just accept what he's done." You can hear the pain in their voice.
It's heartbreaking, and it makes you think.
Right.
While Haigh is fighting to appeal his sentences and claiming remorse, these families are still suffering.
You've hit on a key issue within the justice system, the difficult balance between a perpetrator's right to appeal and the victim's right to peace.
Then there's this article about Hay's 2011 appeal, where he claims he's no threat to society.
In that appeal, he claimed he was remorseful and reformed, even going so far as to say he had multiple personality disorders at the time of his crimes, much like Julian Knight, who was given a minimum sentence because of his diagnosis.
I understand his argument about Julian Knight, but isn't comparing their situations a bit of a stretch, considering the brutality of Hay's crimes?
It's definitely a bold claim. It raises a lot of questions about how remorse and rehabilitation are viewed in the legal system and how much weight these factors should carry in sentencing.
Especially when you consider how he acted in later appeals.
Right.
One article mentions that the judge called his behavior in court impertinent.
Right. That was in an appeal where the court was discussing how Hay's murders were some of the worst combinations of crimes they had seen.
If he was truly remorseful, wouldn't his behavior in court reflect that?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he want to minimize the pain he's caused?
Yeah.
Rather than dragging everyone through these drawn-out legal proceedings?
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
It really makes you question what his motives are here.
It seems like he's trying to control the narrative even now.
Yeah.
He might be physically confined, but he's still trying to manipulate the system.
It's possible, and the article about his tarot cards might support that.
Right.
You know, he fought to have them back even though they were considered inappropriate for the prison environment.
So we have this complicated individual, a man who's committed horrific acts, yet shows this strange need to rationalize his actions.
Yeah.
And continues to exert control however he can.
Exactly. And the justice system is trying to figure out how to respond to such a case, how to balance the need for justice with the possibility of rehabilitation.
This is definitely a lot to think about. It challenges everything you think you know about crime and punishment.
It does. Cases like these, as disturbing as they are, force us to think about the darker parts of human nature and how we as a society respond to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. And, you know, I think that's where exploring these cases becomes so valuable. It pushes us to confront these, you know, unsettling truths and reconsider our own perspectives.
Yeah, you're right. It's easier to simply label someone a monster and just move on.
Right.
But if we don't try and understand how someone reaches that point, how can we prevent similar tragedies from happening?
Exactly. These aren't just stories.
Right.
They're real lives, real families forever impacted by these events.
And that makes me think about, you know, the investigators, the lawyers, even the prison staff. Everyone involved in a case like this must be affected in some way.
Absolutely. It casts a long shadow.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to approach these cases with sensitivity and a sincere desire to learn.
Agreed. So where do we go from here?
Well,
We've talked about Haig's crimes, his psyche, his legal appeals. What else stands out to you?
one thing that really struck me was the sheer brutality of Haig's crimes.
Yeah.
The level of violence, especially with Lisa Burley, is just shocking.
157 stab wounds, it's hard to even fathom.
It really makes you question the nature of violence itself.
Yeah.
What could possibly drive a person to such extremes?
Right.
Is it nature, nurture, or some combination of both?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that,
No.
but it's definitely something worth considering.
You mentioned earlier Haig's need to justify his actions. We see this in his writings, where he attempts to rationalize his choices, even the most horrific ones.
Yeah, it's like he's desperately trying to convince himself that he isn't a monster.
That's an insightful observation. It suggests an internal conflict, maybe even a level of self-awareness that's surprising to see in a serial killer.
Does that suggest he could be capable of change?
I wouldn't go that far, but it does add another layer to this already complex portrait we're building of him.
It also makes his appeals even more baffling.
Right.
He truly feels remorse. Why fight so hard for a chance at freedom he's unlikely to ever get?
That brings us back to the question of motivation.
Right.
What is really driving him? Is it a genuine desire for redemption, or is it something else entirely, like a need for control or a fear of facing the full weight of his actions?
I'm inclined to think it's about control. It seems like he thrives on being in charge, even when he's in a situation where he seemingly has no power.
It's a strong possibility, and we see evidence of this even within the confines of prison. Remember the article about his tarot cards?
Right.
He managed to win that legal battle, even though the cards were deemed inappropriate by the prison.
That speaks volumes about his cunning and his ability to manipulate the system.
It does.
It also makes you wonder about the prison system itself.
Right.
How much freedom should inmates have regarding their religious beliefs, especially when those beliefs clash with prison rules?
It's a delicate balance. Prisoners do have the right to practice their religion, but prisons also have a responsibility to maintain order and security. Finding a solution that respects both sides can be difficult.
So to recap, we have Paul Stephen Haigh, who has committed these horrific crimes, yet also displays a strange self-awareness, a need to rationalize his actions, and this unwavering pursuit of control.
Yes, and we have a legal system trying to determine the appropriate response to such a case, balancing the need for justice with the possibility of rehabilitation and protecting the rights of both victims and perpetrators.
It's heavy stuff, to say the least.
It is.
But it's these types of complex cases that really make you think and challenge your assumptions about right and wrong.
I agree. And while we may never fully grasp what leads someone to commit such acts, exploring these cases can give us a better understanding of the human psyche, both the light and the dark.
Speaking of the impact on the victims, I'd like to circle back to that. I think it's important to delve deeper into what their families have gone through. We've spent a lot of time dissecting Haigh's motivations and the legal intricacies of his case.
Right.
But it's crucial to remember the human cost of his actions.
Absolutely. You're right. The consequences of these crimes reach far beyond Haigh himself.
Watching that YouTube video, Cold-Blooded Haigh, Not Human, was really impactful.
Yeah.
To hear a family member talk about the ongoing trauma, the constant reliving of their pain every time Haig's name resurfaces in the media.
It's tough.
It's just devastating.
It's a harsh reminder that for these families, there's no such thing as a closed case.
Right.
Their wounds remained open, possibly forever.
And that makes Haig's appeals with his claims of remorse ring hollow. If he truly regretted his actions, wouldn't he want to minimize their suffering instead of subjecting them to more legal battles?
That question goes right to the core of the debate about victims' rights.
Yeah.
Should a perpetrator's right to appeal to seek a reduced sentence take precedence over the victim's need for peace and closure?
It's a tough question. I can see both sides, but my heart goes out to the families in this case forced to relive their pain with every legal maneuver Haigh makes.
It highlights a broader issue within the criminal justice system.
Sure.
We often focus so intently on the rights of the accused on due process that the needs of the victims can get overshadowed.
They become secondary characters in their own story.
In a sense, yes, and that's something that needs to change. We need a system that genuinely acknowledges and respects the rights of both the accused and the victims.
Absolutely. So we've examined the horrific details of Haig's crimes, the complexities of his psychology, and the legal and ethical questions surrounding his case.
And importantly, we've acknowledged the profound impact of these crimes on the victims and their families.
Yeah. It's been a difficult conversation.
It has.
But a necessary one.
I agree. Cases like this, disturbing as they are, compel us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about society, about the very nature of good and evil. They challenge our assumptions, our beliefs, and hopefully help us evolve as individuals and as a society.
I am really looking forward to hearing what Simon and Tom think about this case in our weekly review on Sunday. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.